Greetings everyone, this is of course Bro Diallo with the Bro Diallo Show and Bro Diallo YouTube channel. I've gotten a lot of requests to do this, so now thanks to, and I wasn't listening, I didn't follow through, and now the Lord sent a pandemic and got me stuck in the house, so now I don't have any choice but to do that. And what is that I'm talking about? Reviews. I've been asked to do reviews, especially on text, especially a lot of the text that I recommend or authors that I reference during the broadcast of the Bro Diallo Show and in my Q&As. So people ask me if I would review and give more insights into the various texts I use or reference. So here we go. And of course I had to start with war correspondent Dale Jones. I have his entire series of books, but I'm going to start, maybe I'll start with the first three Culture Bandits, and maybe we'll move on, or we'll go through all the Dale Jones books except for my missing copy of 9/11 for Blacks Only. Now it could be here somewhere in my books and files, but I think somebody who will go unnamed in Brooklyn, New York has my copy of 9/11 for Blacks Only. Not gonna name names, put anybody on Front Street, but I like that book back so I can have my Dale Jones collection complete, because as some of you may know, his texts are not easy to get, and I'd like to remedy that. But anyway, enough with the jawboning. Let's get to the text. The book we're reviewing today is, of course, by Dale Jones, the war correspondent. It is Culture Bandits, Volume 1. Did this one have a subtitle? No, it didn't. Most of his texts have subtitles, but just making sure. Want to be thorough. This is Culture Bandits Volume 1 by Dale Jones. Eye of the Storm Communications Incorporated published it, and it was published in 1990, which is around, I think I read the book in 91, so I read this text right when it came out when I was in high school, barely in high school, first year in high school actually. Anyway, the text doesn't break down the structures in the structure of a normal text in terms of chapters and bibliography and glossary and things of that nature, because Dale Jones came up under the mentorship of researchers and scholars like Dr. Ben. And if you read a Dr. Ben book, you'll also notice that his structure doesn't follow the normal academic structure. But it's what is called, or what Dale Jones called, grassroots scholarship. And grassroots scholarship is scholarship that is made for, structured for, and written in the vernacular of the masses, of the people, of the streets. And even though his books are very dense with insight and very well researched and chronicled, because he was a journalist before anything else, you also find that they don't break down in the normal chapters and have the normal structures of a more academic text or a traditionally written text, which is fine. We can still work through it and work with that. Culture Bandits is dedicated to Dale Jones's family and the Know Thyself bookstore. Know Thyself bookstore opened in 1989, and I have concluded, but I don't know for sure because I haven't been able to confirm this, because everything I found online of Know Thyself bookstore in Philadelphia is that it was closed in 2014. Now it could still be open, but the phone number, the website, and all of the things that I have here in Chicago in order to confirm whether it's open or closed in Philadelphia weren't there. And I do have a friend in Philadelphia, and he hasn't gotten back to me. But if the Know Thyself bookstore was still open, he would definitely be able to tell me. So maybe you can let the audience know, if you're listening and you know, I didn't want to give the address and phone number, even though I found the phone number and called it and there was no answer. So that's who he dedicated it to. Dale Jones gave a lot of lectures there and put a lot of financial support into the Know Thyself bookstore, and it'd be great if it's still open. Anyway, let's start with the introduction. The introduction of Culture Bandits is the power and weaponization of the media. And Dale Jones states, anti-African propaganda is a vital key to the survival of white supremacy. Dale Jones really wanted us to understand that culture was more than just entertainment. It was more than fashion. It was more than aesthetics. how we look, how we dress, how we talk. That culture is the essential, most vital element of a people's identity and existence. And he also understood that culture, or the counterculture or anti-African culture, was as vital to the survival of our of systems of oppression and the well-being of our oppressors as our culture is to our resistance of oppression, surviving oppression, and overthrow of oppression, and enduring oppression. Mediums of anti-African propaganda that Dell thought was important was music, print media, radio, film, all platforms, television, telephones, fashion, scholarship, and satellite communications. Of course, this book was written in 1990. I think in a more modern revision of the text, I'm sure he would include the internet and smartphones. But of course, in the 90s, if you were around back then, you would know that those mediums and tools weren't as dominant in media as they are now at the time that Dell wrote the text. Del Jones is quoted as saying, "No mass media product should go unquestioned by the brain computer. The element of trust must be excluded when dealing with mass media, because when we begin to identify with the media messages on a personal tip, we are in grave danger of being used against our own interest." So that impacted me, and I've applied that my entire life. Nothing is taken at face value. Nothing is looked at passively or consumed passively. You'll find a lot of people in modern culture in the black community will say, "I just like the beat," or what I've been told more than, "Can't we just enjoy something? Can't we just have some fun?" When there are media products or something trending, a meme trending in the black community, and you attempt to give critical analysis or input about that popular meme or popular media product, popular song, popular dance, popular internet challenge, they say, "Well, can't black folks just have fun?" Now, in our community, we need to understand that fun can be had without shutting down our critical minds. Fun can be intellectual, it can be scholarly, and we don't have to exclude critical critique in order to enjoy things, because we are in a state of oppression and our culture is under relentless attack. And not just an attack in terms to extract from our culture, but an attack in terms of to warp our culture and our perception of self. To quote Dr. Bobby E. Wright, one of his most famous quotes, he said, "We cannot use white definition to explain black phenomena." So if you read a lot of books from the 90s and 80s and back to the 70s during what Dell called the Black Books era, a lot of revolutionary and radical scholars would include a glossary of terms to explain what they mean by those words, because a lot of times the dominant system will warp words or will have culturally loaded words such as criminal or urban or inner city, whereas there's a standard definition of those words, but there's also a embedded identity or embedded understanding, dog whistle, in those words as well. So Del Jones has a comprehensive glossary of terms. In the beginning of his glossary of terms, he quotes Sekou Touré, one of his own teachers and mentors, in saying every society has its own culture, and every culture its own values of civilization. Thus, we easily understand that every act, every objective to be achieved should be necessarily be within the scope of culture. Everything is culture, essentially. And the first thing he defined in his glossary of terms was culture. Number one, culture. Everything people do, why they do it, when they do it, and how it's done. Everything falls into the realm of culture. And then he defines colonialism, mass media, radio, TV, film, video, print. He also, the ninth term is glossary, in his glossary is colonized scholarship. The control over outreach, research, and information about us. 10. Academic terrorism. He defines as discrimination against our ancestors and our educators who challenge the lies that they, whites, perpetuate to deny tenure, employment, and advanced degrees. So academic terrorism is if you don't toe the line of the status quo, if you don't advocate for the ideology, systems, and institutions of global white domination and capitalism, you can be denied a livelihood. And if you know a scholar, I'm married to a scholar, they put a lot of work into getting those PhDs, hours and hours into their research. So, I mean, to have someone spend a good quarter of their lives researching, studying, and become up to the doctorate level, and then deny them the ability to participate in the academia or make a living at that, that is quite terrorizing. Also, he defines cultural genocide: to destroy the culture of our people, claim all they can accept as their creation, while destroying those elements that are undigestible by the European. Another goal is to confuse the people. The death of the culture would lead to the death of the people. Or as what Bobby Wright had said around that same time, 89, 88, that menticide, which is the destruction of a group's mind, with the ultimate goal being the extirpation of those people. Well, Dale Jones said cultural genocide is the destruction of a people's culture, with the long-term goal being to extract profit from those people. At the same time, you diminish their capacity to sustain themselves or to kill them. And then he also goes on to define audience to advertisers, subliminal message, subliminal seduction, gospel music, the blues, R&B, jazz, rock and roll, African music, contemporary music, crossover music, fusion, soap operas. He has a lot of media terms and media concepts that he breaks down and defines in the glossary of terms. For sake of brevity, I went over some of the ones I highlighted. Was that beat?
It was small, but
okay. So, but again, we don't really have time to go over all of these. If we come back, if there's a demand that we go over each of the terms one by one, maybe we can do a part 2 or a revisit of the text. Let's move on to the next section, is what the mass media is and ain't. Dale Jones states, I quote, "The media is their tool designed to perpetuate their society and the control over the world by the white collective, white supremacy, capitalism, and racism. No aspect of the mass media is independent or accidental or unconnected to the systems and institutions of global white domination. Nothing in this society that you see, nothing produced in this society is by accident." So a lot of times in the media, we'll see Gucci will produce a monkey keychain or a monkey sweater, or some woman might come on talking about a beloved athlete and say New York Knickers and all of that. But what you have to understand is none of that's by accident. Even when they come out with heartfelt apologies and redactions, because even with that New York Knickers thing with Kobe Bryant, television, live broadcast television is ran on a delay. That's why when people curse, like if you went on a live Fox News feed or some other live broadcast and you got up there and said a swear word, or if you said something anti-Semitic, they can still beep you because there is a multiple second delay in live broadcast. So by the time they accidentally let something slip through, that's accidentally on purpose. And Dale Jones, again, he said we can't take any of this at face value. We can't passively consume any form of media, even positive media such as Black Panther, that is told to uplift us. You don't simply just say, okay, because this is put out by black people and by Disney, allowed a black person to send us this message. No media should be passively consumed or assumed to have a benign effect. It's either moving you forward or moving you backwards, or trying to warp your understanding or educate you. But again, as Wise Intelligent also said, take nothing at face value. The next section, they have stolen our song, historical overview. And in the stolen song, he actually gets into what we understand to be culture banditry, where they take our culture and redesign it, rework it to profit from, or colonize the music, in Dale Jones' words. And one of the ways they did this is by creating musical category. He states that they destroy, control, redefine our music for us. They isolate the songs, dances, poems that threaten their control and destroy them. How? By making the creation of such work unprofitable, because they control the other mediums of communication. The development of our musical culture is stagnated by the profit motive. The rage The rags to riches, the rags to riches, carrot on a stick leads many to develop music against the needs of the black community and in many cases perpetuate negativity to gain access to the airways for 10 pieces of silver. And this pretty much sums it up. Jay-Z is not a billionaire. Kanye is not a billionaire because they are the best rappers. Because regardless of your talent, all the talent in the world does not supersede the satellites, the broadcast licenses, whereas the FCC determines what's appropriate to be on the airways and can find a radio station out of existence. So they don't just control the music record labels, they control the means and the media and the mediums by which anything is communicated. So what becomes popular is not what is best or not even what's most entertaining, but what most serves the interests of the elite and the people who control and owns the means of production. And does that mean you don't really like Jay-Z? Yes, you do like Jay-Z if you're a Jay-Z fan. I'm not denying that, but the fact that Jay-Z had so much access to develop a rapport and to have you have access to his hit single and to his video projects and all of that is not a passive thing. It's a deliberate, direct thing. In fact, having read this book so long ago, anytime something becomes hyper popular, the more popular it becomes, the more suspicious of it I am, because understanding that what it takes for that to be. So even, let's forget about any individual artist, the fact that gangster rap so overwhelms anti-social hip hop. And it really can't even say, some gangster rap talks about driving in a hoopty. When in the 90s, when I was coming up, the gangsters would rap about their poverty, how they drive bucket cars, how they stay up all nights in the crack house and grind, and you know, some rappers even talk about, I got holes in the bottom of my shoe and have to put cardboard in my shoe. Whereas the new gangster rap, instead of riding around the hood in hoopties, they're flying through the air in Lear jets and private jets, or riding around in Maybachs. And so it's all, some of it's materialist gangster rap, some of it's antisocial gangster rap. If you listen to Grip It on that other level, the gangster says, you know, my stomach is empty, I can hear my stomach growling, and that's what provokes me to go out and harm other black people. Whereas another guy says, I'm a baller and I'm better than all other black people because they ain't living like me, they don't have floor seats at the Laker games. So it's a wide range of music, but the tender focus is antisocial, making other black people the target of your animosity, as opposed to the system that led you to poverty, or celebrating the system because it gave you wealth, you know. So gangster rap did not become the dominant antisocial because it's better than conscious rap, or even alternative rap like Dream Warriors and PM Dawn. There are several manifestations of hip hop culture and hip hop music, but if you go and look at World Star Hip Hop or any of the popular websites, the vast majority of the songs that are popular are either completely vacuous, apolitical, or degenerate, antisocial, attack other blacks for your own personal gains type music. That's not by accident, that is cultivated. And gangster rap was not conceived of in the black community, it was conceived of in a corporate boardroom, if not a CIA PSYOPs operation, which we'll be reviewing that book with Kidi Awado's book, Hip Hop in the New World Order. So I don't want to jump books, let's stay focused here. Awards from the Culture Bandit. He talks about other ways they steal and control and direct. He talks about like they colonize the music. There are awards, who they grant awards and recognition to, isolating elements, how they isolate certain genres and classify certain genres. But Joe Jones would always say this, out of the drum we come. And so the foundation, drum is the base is the foundation, and that's our way out. You know, just as our culture can be a tool for perpetuate our oppression, it can also be our way out. He talks about gospel music is the first form of music African people created in the United States, and it was at one time another, just like hip hop, a liberation music that's kind of, if you listen to modern day gospel as it relates to the prosperity ministry, it's another way that, so how when corporate interests come into our culture, they can pervert it. And then I'll read another quote closer to the end of this section where he said, there were no blues in our drum, the first African form captured by our oppressors. So he said he said gospel and blues were the first musical forms captured by our present. Music is the universal language. He says that facetiously. Dale Jones doesn't believe that music is the universal language, but he said, music is the universal language, quote unquote. If this was true, then why don't the whites further develop their music and voice from their own cultural base? Why is their music left unattended while they invade ours? For the same reason they went out to and conquered the world, because their land was dead and they were too barbaric to develop anything that was not also lifeless. So theft of our culture, perversion of our culture is vital to the sustaining of their culture and their systems. He has a large section on jazz. Dale Jones, if you read Culture Bandits, has a very, very strong bias towards jazz, but of course, he was also a musician, and as Sheon Kuti told me one time, jazz is musicians' music. Like, you really have to have a trained ear to really, truly appreciate it. At least that's what the snob, Sheon, and other snobby musicians like to tell me about jazz. But anyway, I'll let y'all read that self. I'll just say, read the quote where Dale said, "Jazz was always the people's music. Jazz is the voice of all that was and all will be. It has no king, it has no queen. It's just explorer of inner vision." It's just an explorer of inner vision. So he loved jazz, but he also talked about talked about rhythm and blues. He said R&B got so big it became an international commodity. The music was creating a feeling of affection for the blacks in this country who were trapped in neo-slavery. He talks about rap and reggae, and see, he puts rap and reggae together, but rap and reggae are fingers on the same hand. It is music that spun up from the objective reality of the suffering of the people who developed it. Then he goes in extension to talk about 3 particular artists that were basically case studies in the cultural war and cultural banditry, which was Bob Marley, Fela Kuti, and Public Enemy. He knew Bob Marley personally and had interviewed and worked with Bob Marley. When I met Dale Jones later, when we were living in New York, he came to our bookstore to give a lecture. He had a lot of really interesting stories about Bob Marley. But he said Marley was fearless. He said Marley was fearless, a grassroots warrior he was, and his bravery is legend to those who can still see and hear. About Fela, whom Dale also met briefly, he said Fela never backed down from his war against not only Nigeria's corrupt regimes, but also the enemies of African liberations, both whites and their black funkies. And it's way too much to go into what he said about Fela. He had great admiration about Fela, and he goes into detail about how mainstream black artists in the United States actually wanted to work with Fela. Some did. Roy Ayers did a magnificent collaboration, but other, like I think it was the Commodores or Earth, Wind and Fire, some other major group from the 70s wanted to work with and even tour with Fela, and they were all discouraged. So he talked about how Fela's presence was suppressed in the United States for many years. In fact, his music became more and more popular after he was assassinated than before. But he does recommend a text, and Dale Jones quotes a biography called Fela, This Bitch of a Life by Carlos Moore is the text that he recommended. I'm actually going to look into getting a copy, but the cheapest copy I was able to find was $80. So I'm going to continue my search unless I come up on a come up. Then he talks about Public Enemy, and again, this is 90s Public Enemy, not reality show Flavor Flav or that bickering. So you have to kind of know Public Enemy from the 90s to really understand and really absorb this quote and where they stood in the larger arena of hip hop. If you're looking at Public Enemy today, you're a few decades off from this quote. But he said, the Public Enemies, KRS-Ones, MC Lights, Latifahs are young people attempting to be historically responsible to our needs as a people. They are targets, oblivious targets of the culture bandits. If it can be done by isolation, economic oppression, or character assassination, they are the tactics that will be used. If it is to be done violently, they will not hesitate. They will and can destroy. can we defend and perpetuate? That's the key question of the 90s. And this stood out so much because here in 2020, we see how Public Enemy, KRS-One, and a lot of artists from that era who were considered counterculture or conscious or militant, how things played out to this day. As I said, from reality TV to KRS-One going from essentially a African revolutionary rapper to a Christian rapper promoting prosperity gospel through the temple of hip hop. So and even in KRS-One says, yeah, I was poor, but now I'm rich. And he brags about how his wealth is a blessing from God, which if you had talked to me in 1990 when I had my copy of My Philosophy or Edutainment or Sex and Violence, if you had told me some of the things KRS-One would say or some of the albums he would later produce, like Spiritually Minded, which was a gospel album, or Sneak Attack, which is literally a sneak attack Christian album, I wouldn't have believed you. But the culture bandits are relentless. If they cannot co-opt you, they will subvert you. If they cannot subvert you, they will kill you. And so we see the subversion and how we have to, when we do get a progressive, conscious, militant artist, we have to erect defenses around them. But I find that when I go out to see, we brought artists here, and it was very hard to get an audience for them. I went to see, I didn't do this, but I went to see Wise Intelligent perform at Hyde Park at the Promontory. And Hyde Park historically was like the home of Chicago hip hop for a while, because they had several record stores there, and that was the culture, and it was an empty venue. So if we don't consciously, we can't just let the market decide, because the market is not an invisible hand as they like to pretend. The market is a very deliberate and directed space, and the market will suppress anything that is beneficial to the African collective and our liberation. And then he talks about the economics of culture bandits, and the title of that section is To the Slave, Payday Never Comes. Dale states that starving young artists like Fats Waller were caught down and out and had to sell compositions for $5 and $10 that later became not only hits but classics, perpetual money makers. So when you go back to Fats Waller and a lot of artists, Little Richard getting paid half a penny per album, you'll see that there are white families and white economic dynasties today that are getting paid and being enriched off of the artistry of our ancestors. And you can go to places which is crazy. You go to Japan and you see all these artists, our ancestors, all their music is being played everywhere. Even James Brown, who hasn't been dead for very long, his music is, and Michael Jackson. Where is that Michael Jackson but deliberately put all of his legacy and his future revenues in the hands of white folks. But we ain't got to go back to Fats Waller. Y'all remember New York niggas know how to play Deja Vu by Peter Guns and Lord Tariq. Their music, the royalties, I saw him being interviewed, and he was like, this is the most hood anthem of the 90s, and now all that revenue goes into the hands of white people. They didn't get any of that money. DMX just came out and said he doesn't get any royalties or revenues. De La Soul came out and said Tommy Boy Records was robbing him. Wise Intelligent said that Profile Records hadn't been paying him Culture Freedom or the late Father Shaheed and his descendants. So to the slave, the payday never comes. And that's one element of culture bandits, where they strip mine our culture like they strip mine our lands in Africa. Black people don't profit from our labor, our creations, our culture. To the slave, the payday never comes. And then the final, the one before the final chapter is cultural maintenance. Del Jones states that naturally the developers of cultures would maintain it by practicing it, shielding it from outsiders, and of course passing it on to the children as a major school socializing tool. However, in the case of the African and the type of slavery we suffered under, the type of colonization developed to contain us while we were raped of everything, plus the neo-colonialism that is inflicted on us now, we can't maintain anything without tremendous effort. Meaning that nothing we do that we see as positive, nothing that we want to perpetuate in ourselves, is just going to come passively. Or as Kwame Ture said, we can't just have culture. We have to have revolutionary culture. We just can't have a nation. We have to have a revolutionary nation. We can't just settle in a marriage or love or a community. We have to revolutionize every element of our existence because there is a perpetual attack. And if we try to function as normal people function, we will end up, unfortunately, in a state of confusion as we are now, because we fail to revolutionize, and we think we do these protests, we follow these rules, we earn the money, we do the investment, we do everything right, but every generation we end up fighting the same battles of the previous generation. 100 years ago we were fighting police brutality and black men being killed in the streets with no legal consequences. That's a 100-year-old fight that we just last week got a whole nother incident of. That's because we have to revolutionize every element of our culture, and by extension that means revolutionizing every element of our existence. Finally, Del Jones, in his final section or chapter, he talks about sounds and images, and he states that culture bandits learned long ago that they could not silence the music, that it must be co-opted into their scheme of things, and it cannot be allowed to develop into an agent of freedom. And then he offers a long list of artists that he recommends that every African household, all African children and elders should have some familiarity with. Some overtly political, some just culturally relevant. And I'm not going to go over that list. It's quite long, but maybe we'll insert that list into the videos. Well, I'll name some that stood out to me. The Staple Singers, Reverend Isaac Douglas, Count Basie, Hugh Masekela, Olatunji, Bob Marley, of course, Fats Domino, Little Richard, Ray Charles, Otis Redding, The Dales, Oscar Brown Jr., The Last Poet, John Lee Hooker, Howlin' Wolf, B.B. Kings, The Platters, Temptation, Blow Diddley, Earth, Wind & Fire, Odetta, Boogie Down Productions, Aretha Franklin, Billie Holiday. And that's just a few, but there's a long list of other artists that we should, and this again is about being deliberate about our culture, not just saying, hey, I like this, it's funky, but saying these are the necessary cultural products and cultural leaders and cultural producers that we need to be an ongoing dialogue with, speaking to our ancestors and allowing our ancestors to speak to and through us in a literal sense in terms of the music and other cultural products they left behind. Well, that's all the major points, that we got from this. It's my first time doing this. If you watch my other shows, I don't really generally go off a script. I kind of just do the research and then speak freely. So this was interesting for me. And I look forward to doing Culture Bandits 2, The Annihilation of African Images. But we're going to at least do the first 3 Del Jones books and then maybe decide whether or not we'll do the additional 3 books that he wrote. Or we'll move on to other titles because there are a lot of books to review. But since this is a review, I also like to give a rating. I'll go off the black fist symbol. And so I would give Del Jones' book and reading 5 Black Fists. I think it talks about the urgency of being conscious and deliberate about our culture. It helps us to understand that our culture is much bigger than just the aesthetics or surface things, but it is actually the key to our ongoing survival as a people. Because if we exist without our culture, or if we live without our culture, we will be absorbed. That is assimilation. When you lose your culture and you totally take someone else's culture, you lose yourself and your identity. So I'm glad that Del Jones was not just a warrior, he was a cultural warrior. And my favorite quote from Del Jones is when he said, warfare is 90% culture. And when you let your enemy get into your culture, it's all Mickey Mouse. So if we could preserve and sustain our culture, we've already won 90% of all conflicts. And then the 10% in terms of the military and the resources and all that will eventually fall in place. So, in conclusion, I like to do at least one of these a week. I like, again, to shout out Aromoland Production, my son, who has taped and edited this. Delta Star Media, that's working to help me to get Bro Diallo Show, help me with my broadcast and media consulting. Shout out to Dr. Africa, of course, shout out to Del Jones, and shout out to his entire support network, his wife that survived him, Sister Q, and maintaining our temples. And I will see y'all next time. Of course, like, subscribe, what else? Turn on notifications, all that. You can find me at diallokenyatta.com. Find other videos / Diallo Kenyatta across social media, and / Diallo Kenyatta at YouTube. Subscribe to Diallo Kenyatta YouTube if you want to see more of this and all the hundreds. I got a couple of hundred videos on my YouTube already, so other types of content. So have at it, and I'll catch y'all later. Peace.
All right, cut.
Oh, sorry. Also, you can go. Did I mention Patreon?
No.
You can go to my Patreon to help with production costs and sustaining and helping Q4 Studios and Q4 Radio to stay above water during this lockdown crisis. And go to AfricanWorldOrder.com where you can get things like your own African World Order. You can get Bro Diallo Show merch and shirts and all kind of other accessories. We call that the aesthetics of liberation, deliberate, conscious, revolutionary culture. Now I'm done, I promise.
All right, cut.